Good evening and welcome back to Ethics and Finance. It's Thursday, 13 August 2020, and I'm excited that so many of you have once again decided to join us. Today's topic consists of a number of concepts and cases related to ethics and finance. While we work on shedding light on unethical behavior using several handpicked case studies, the education at UTS is focused on preparing you, the students, for the commercial reality of financial services to permit your swift and successful career starts after university. Therefore, I've invited a member of the financial industry tonight to highlight operations, opportunities, and the very commercial reality of ethical investing. Our guest tonight is Kirk McNeill, who is Manager for Client Services at Sydney-based fund manager Australian Ethical Investment. Kirk has brought along his colleague Florencia Quinteros. A warm welcome to both of them. Thank you for coming. Kirk's firm has supported the UTS Business School for many years with practical and relevant knowledge related to ethical investing. Importantly, Kirk has hired students from this very seminar to work with him, leading to some students developing an actual passion for finance, which they reported they did not have before attending this seminar. A lasting career and life choice which demonstrate the impact of our engagement with real-life finance in the real-life or virtual classrooms. Australian Ethical is also a sponsor of the Australian Ethical Investment Prize, which is given to the best student in each semester in this seminar. I welcome students to consider this prize as an extra encouragement to do well in this class, and I thank Australian Ethical Investment on behalf of the UTS Business School for this support to our students. Kirk, I'm inviting you now to share your screen, and I'm inviting all students to submit questions via the chat window.
Great, thanks Gerhard. Thanks for having me. It's always a pleasure to talk to everyone at UTS. We've been doing this now for a couple of years. So as Gerhard mentioned, we've built some great relationships and yeah, a few of your previous students from this class have come and joined us at Australian Ethical and found a passion for ethical investing and what we do. A little bit of my background. So I've been working in financial services for the past 15 years, primarily in superannuation funds, in client-facing roles and through member education. So I've a little bit of experience in this space, and I've been at Australian Ethical for the past 3 years, which has just been tremendous. And as an organisation, we've gone through a substantial amount of change through that time. So it's been a really exciting journey for myself and my fellow colleagues. So a little bit about Australian Ethical. I'm not sure if everyone's aware of us or heard of us before. We're Australia's leading ethical investment manager. We've been around since 1986, so just over 30 years, which is pretty amazing. We're an ASX listed company, so we've just scraped into the ASX 300, managing about $4 billion of funds under management. For about 60,000 customers. So that's split across our superannuation fund and also our direct managed investments. So we're a little bit different from your mainstream managers that we believe between the balance of profit and purpose. And by investing ethically, we've proven that, we can provide, competitive returns for our investors whilst also providing positive outcomes for society and the planet. We have a positive impact through our investments by advocating on critical issues and supporting non-for-profits and social enterprise through our foundation as well. So the growth of responsible investing in Australia has been quite substantial over the last few years. Whilst we've been doing this for over 30 years, many other investment managers, this is a much more recent development. Hence, sustainable investment or responsible investing was really flat for a few years. However, over the past 4 years, we've seen this segment quadruple. Investments in these sort of options now sit around about $633 billion and represent about 47% of all professionally managed funds within Australia. That means that about $1 and $2 invested professionally in Australia today has some sort of social, environmental, or governance consideration applied to it, as well as the traditional financials. So what does this all mean? So you got shades of green. So this is how we sort of determine what ethical investing is within our office. So rising demand has meant more products coming to the market over the past few years, and there's no doubt that navigating responsible investing can be confusing, mainly because there's no agreed definition on what is or isn't responsible. Broadly, responsible investing goes beyond traditional financial valuations to provide and consider environmental and social impacts of a company. But how do you cut through all the green labels to understand what is responsible? So we've sort of come up with the term, and probably not unique, but to sort of light green to dark green. So it's a simple approach to consider the shades there. So ESG being the most common approach that's been used by big global managers, ETFs and index providers, and is the lightest approach with a top-down screening. More funds are choosing negative screening or exclusions of things like tobacco, weapons, and gambling. And then you have SRI funds that are sustainably themed and take a positive approach and seek out investments in sectors such as clean energy or green technology. Moving down the list, you've got impact investing, and this has been the domain generally in the past of private equity or microfinance to fund social purpose initiatives, and it's hard to access generally through traditional fund managers and fund structures. And then sort of down the deep end, which Australian Ethical sits, is ethical investing. So it's the deepest approach, taking in all dimensions of responsible investing, right from ESG through to impact, and is looking primarily at its overall impact in terms of its contribution to what ethical investing is. So how does Australian Ethical do it? So Australian Ethical has built its investment capability on the back of our ethical charter. So it's established in 1986, so when the business was formed, and it's 23 guiding principles that set out how Australian Ethical approaches investing. So with a positive screen and negative screen. It also guides how we operate as a business. So everything from investments to our advocacy work, right through to our own suppliers, we put through this particular framework. So when you think of responsible ethical investing, you obviously probably think about exclusions. So this is definitely an important part of the story if you don't want your money funding things that are threatening our future. For Australian Ethical, our negative screening avoids sectors and stocks that cause unnecessary harm to people, planet, and animals. And these things are like tobacco, gambling, fossil fuels, exploitation of people, forest logging, etc. It's important to know that Australian Ethical goes far beyond the mere exclusions of sort of the producers of these or manufacturers, and looks through the supply chain and distribution chain to ensure we aren't getting any unintended exposure to things that we want to avoid. So that's a particular important part, is looking through right from who's on the board of a company right through to where are they sourcing their materials from and who's making them. Like many fund managers, we're excluding the controversial sectors, but we're also looking to make a positive approach in investments that we think are sustainably going to make a difference to our future. So our positive approach actively seeks out and identifies, companies that we think are going to have a benefit to the way we actually live as a society. So we're investing quite heavily in areas such as IT and healthcare, education, efficiencies, and transport. It's quite easy in our current environment to forget about the devastation of the bushfires that swept through Australia earlier this year. As a result of sort of people's climate change concerns, investors flooded the market to look for companies that support these types of investments. And this was quickly followed by the challenges of COVID. And that demand has shifted slightly, and it's driving, consideration to things that are going to build back our economy in a better, cleaner manner. So there's been a number of headlines that Australian Ethical has been part of. We are really driving that green sort of push to build back an economy based on ethical investing. So how do we do it? So our ethical charter drives our sort of consideration when it comes to what we select when it meets our sort of screening criteria. So of our potential investment universe, does it pass the charter? So that's that positive negative screen. Then does it go through the next step to an investment analysis? So is the particular investment of good value? Once it goes through that, it's up for investment approval. And then we put all our investments through continual monitoring. So that ensures that depending on how they score on our ethical framework, a business will go through a monitoring period either once a year or every 2 years generally. And we'll do ad hoc reviews as well of companies that we believe may need attention for us to make some considerations around, are their practices still aligned to our ethical charter, even outside of their general standard review? And we do tend to divest, from a company that, either through engagement hasn't responded, or primarily their business fundamentals have changed so they don't meet our screening criteria. So what's sort of driving our sort of investment decisions primarily for a lot of our sort of customers is climate change. It is our biggest concern for our investors. So Australian Ethical's made the commitment to have net zero carbon emissions from our portfolio by 2050. So it's quite a big step. So when we're looking at investments, one of the key criteria that we're looking at is an ethical framework, and it encompasses quite a few different areas, such as climate, as an example, food, social welfare, treatment of employees. But for this particular slide, I picked up climate. Australian Ethical's portfolios overall are about 75% less carbon intensive than a benchmark. And this is particularly important because we're looking to ensure our investments have an exposure to climate change of under 2 degrees, and we're aiming for 1.5 in terms of the Paris Climate Agreement. So what we're looking for that sort of also drives our investments is, the levers that we have available to us as a fund manager. So that's ensuring that our investments obviously meet our ethical charter, but we also do quite a bit of advocacy work. Recent results from the Edelman Trust Barometer show that a majority of respondents expect businesses to be a force for positive and social change. And to earn the highest level of consumer trust, brands must back up their brand promise with action. Consumers know that brands have the power to be a real effect for change, and they'll place their trust in brands that use their power on their behalf. And that's essentially what Australian Ethical is doing with our advocacy work. We are pushing our agenda through private and public engagement with companies, shareholder resolutions, and also policy submissions to governments and regulators. So we're one of the very few financial institutions in Australia that use our voice in this manner and take a stand in line with what we believe is true to our ethical charter and our sort of position on topical issues. The other component of what we do is our foundation, and this is essentially an important part of our business. So 10% of our profits go back through to grassroots organisations and through an annual community grants program. So since it started in 2000, we've donated about $3.5 million to a number of different organisations that have effectively used that money to get really well worth programs off the ground. We also have sort of now staged multi-year strategic grants to a number of organisations as well for larger significant projects. And we're also doing impact investment through Social Ventures Australia. So I wanted to deep dive quickly onto sort of how we manage a particular portfolio, and we thought we'd look at the Australian Shares Fund. The fund strategy is to invest in a diversified portfolio of companies listed on the ASX and New Zealand Stock Exchange, which meet both our ethical criteria and have investment appeal. To give you a feel for the extent of our ethical screening, we exclude around 60% of the ASX 200, while the fund has substantial exposure to large cap stocks. It's heavily weighted to small caps. We've historically added significant alpha in small caps relative to large caps. Small caps are under-researched and where much of the sort of upside resides. So this is kind of where Australian Ethical really specialises in, and it's proven quite successful for our particular fund. And I'll go into a little bit more detail about that next. So our ethical charter shapes our portfolio, and it does look quite different to mainstream managers. This sector allocation of our Australian equities fund, and you can see where we have little to no exposure in energy and materials, or industrials, and we're significantly overweighted in sectors such as healthcare, IT, utilities, which takes into account renewables. To give you a feel for the extent of our ethical filters, we exclude around, as I mentioned, about 60% of the ASX 200. And, part of our portfolio is looking at the small, mid-cap and micro-cap parts of the market. We are a highly diversified portfolio that avoids concentration risk and inherent bias of the Australian market. There's a perception that ethical investing tends to be riskier than your historical traditional mainstream sort of investing approach. This is sort of not the case when it comes to Australian ethical. So that perception there that, we will have a higher risk because we're excluding particular options isn't the case. This is probably due to a number of reasons in the past. But you can see from this particular slide, Australian ethical is the blue dot, meaning that we have a lower risk and essentially a higher return than, say, the benchmark ASX S&P 200 or the sort of small industrials index as well. So we're particularly proud of this. This is over a 3-year period. Over a 10-year period, that sort of looks a little bit different as well. Australian ethical sort of moves up a little bit further into the top left-hand corner, which is the space where you want to be there. So it's sort of disproving that theory that ethical investing, is riskier and provides a lower level of return. So definitely this year has been a challenging start. 2020, has been one of the craziest I can remember, and I worked during the GFC. So what we can see on this particular slide here is sort of our performance of the Australian share market since 2012 versus the Australian Ethical Australian Shares Fund wholesale. Our fund was able to deliver a positive return over the 12 months ending June 30, which was quite remarkable in the Australian market given the context of COVID, where the broader market, the ASX S&P 200 had a negative return of 7.7%. Over the COVID period as well, we've had particular, interest in capital raising exercises, and we've been involved in over 25 different capital raising opportunities as well, investing about $60 million into things like healthcare and IT, which was, quite an opportunity for us as well during this particular time. What we did during the crisis is that we stuck to our investment philosophy and process, and we didn't deviate from that despite the large amount of volatility that was occurring. And we just stuck to our strategic asset allocation throughout the course of the extreme amount of volatility, which kept our fund management team particularly busy, ensuring that our portfolios were balanced. This is just a little bit of a snapshot of return of Australian shares. It sort of highlights as well how ethical investing, does prove to drive positive investment returns whilst giving back, positive impact to our society. So the relevant performance over 1 year up to June 30 for Australian Share Fund was plus 10%. Compared to the benchmark, which was negative 7.7, and that's continued also through a longer period of time as well. This is looking at our wholesale fund for Australian shares, and it's outperformed the benchmark year on year quite significantly. So our investors who have been invested with us for a longer period of time are particularly happy with their conviction in terms of jumping on board and doing something a little bit different back in a number of years ago. So I think we're about 20 minutes in, so Gerhard sort of opened it up to Q&A for the last 10 minutes. Does anyone have any particular questions?
Kirk, this is great, and we collected several questions in the chat window. So first of all, thank you for this very interesting presentation. In particular, the process and the data you presented, I think, is very intriguing, and I think this sparked a lot of interest on the student side.
So first of all, hi Kirk, thanks for the presentation.
No worries.
Second of all, A question, does the ratio of investments in particular ESG areas change in response to current events? So as an example, I provided with COVID-19, the pandemic, has Australian Ethical focused on more investments in healthcare, aged care and medical solutions during this time?
We tend to be overweight in those particular sectors anyway. So sort of the chart I showed where the Australian share portfolio was positioned pre-COVID is generally where we are for across most of our funds. We've always been driven by what the needs are for future generations. So we always seen, with an aging population, healthcare as a particular area of opportunity. Also with IT, enabling people to be more connected, and being able to facilitate things like working from home, which, has had a significant reduction, especially during lockdown in Sydney, of sort of our air quality. People weren't traveling as much. I think we had our best air quality days for a number of years. So these things are all supporting, a number of our different ethical frameworks, in particular climate change, which, as I said, was the number one driver for our particular customers. So when we survey them quite regularly, that always does come to the top of the list. But depending on what's occurring at the time, other areas of ethical interest do spike. Last year, we had a lot of interest around campaigns that were running about, removing children from Nauru, as an example. And we were the organisation that put forward the petition to sort of take children out of detention centres. So that was led by our head of ethics, Dr. Stuart Palmer. So in terms of what makes investment opportunities, the team follows sort of that process where they're looking to ensure that the investment is good value. So that's sort of, there's a lot of wonderful ethical businesses out there. I have an example, I think, in one of the extra slides down the bottom of an organisation that does blood work. We think it's an excellent company, but we think it's overvalued, so we're not going to invest in it. We need to balance as well. We don't compensate our ethics for investment return or vice versa.
Great. Thank you so much, Kirk. And we can now move on.
Thanks again for the presentation, Kirk. I just had a quick question regarding, especially after the Royal Commission and the findings into superannuation and how that was managed in some of the bigger funds. Did you see that more people wanted to invest their funds in smaller ethical funds like yourself?
We didn't see probably the Royal Commission drive our acquisition of new members particularly as a reason. I think a lot of Australians, saw the headlines, but unfortunately not many took particular action. There was definitely a few people that, wanted to get out of sort of the big banks or the traditional fund managers that had, probably questionable advice models. But for the overall general public, it probably didn't drive what many would perceive as a driver to think about where they're investing or how they're operating. Like many people, changing your bank or superannuation fund is always on that list of things that people should get to. What we tend to find is how we acquire our customers is through their values. So if you're particularly interested around, climate change or another ethical component, that would probably bring you to look for an alternative rather than probably what the Royal Commission put out there.
Oh, cool. Thank you. Yeah, that answers. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you.
In saying that, sorry, just to add to that.
Go ahead, Flo.
What we did notice, just to add to that, funnily enough, and it's a good social experiment, there wasn't, as Kirk said, an uprise after the Royal Commission, but there was a huge surge after the bushfires and what we saw happening. So I think when people actually see the effects of, disastrous climate change happening on their doorstep, they act. I think sometimes the Royal Commission can be a little bit, technical, or if it's not happening to you directly, perhaps it's not such a big thing, but people were desperate to do something. And that's when I think they turned to their finances and saw they could have a real impact. So I think there we saw some really positive change and some consciousness coming to light.
Very, very interesting, Florencia, because some of you may follow social media probably more than I do, but I see a lot of Bill Gates kind of postings that say COVID-19 is awful. but climate change could be much worse. And I think there's probably some tangible experiences that you just shared of consumers that translate into now being to vote with their feet or better invest with their feet.
Absolutely.
Brilliant. Thank you for contributing this. And
so over the past month, AEF on the ASX has lost 1/3 of its market cap despite reaching an all-time high in mid-June. Is there any particular reason for the share price to be as it is now?
That's one that I generally can't comment on. So up until the end of the financial year, our stock price had gone up about 274%. So we're one of the top performing stocks on the ASX over the last 12 months. So what we've seen is that there's been quite an increased amount of volatility with our particular fund. Probably what drove the decline in our value over the last few days was just a big sell-off from IWF, who sold about $84 million worth of shares, I think maybe to Citibank, at a discount there. So IWF has been an investor with Australian Ethical for a number of years, and made significant profit on that particular holding. So what we do see is a little bit of volatility in our particular sort of stock price, but once again, that's market driven, and I don't have an answer as to why it goes up and down like it does. Our business model hasn't changed, and we're continuing our normal growth trajectories. So we do regular ASX announcements in terms of our performance. 2019-20 was a particularly strong year for Australian Ethical, our best yet, with record profit and growth.
It was answered, I guess, by one of the slides, but
maybe I can extend to that. And so we saw on that slide, to your very question, I think slide 15, great performance delivered by the firm. Kirk, you have to help me out. Like, good performance or good returns, bottom line means that top line is coming in nicely as well. Tell us a little bit about the value proposition of your products and maybe the price tag, just out of curiosity.
Yeah, so Australian Ethical, we'd like to see ourselves, in terms of pricing, sitting in the middle of the market. We do offer, we believe, a unique investment approach with our ethical screening, and also the additional work that we do in terms of communicating our investment approach with our sort of investors and members, and the additional work we do in the advocacy space and foundation space. So it's a balance between profit for purpose, so rewarding the people that invested in our business to create change, and also ensuring that we're competitive in the market. So Australian Ethical has always had a fee strategy where we want to pass on reductions in our costs to our customers to ensure that we are staying competitive and sort of at least in the middle of the market when it comes to the costs associated with investing in this particular product. For our options as well, we publish our performance after fees. So if you're looking at our website performance, they're net of fees. So, we fundamentally think that, if you're getting great performance and you're also making substantial change in things like reducing carbon emissions, if there's a price to pay for that, that is definitely well worth it.
Great. Thank you, Kirk, for adding that to the performance angle.
The first question was, apart from green measures such as climate change, does AE use any other measures on the ESG scale? So the question, an example I'm thinking of the top of my head, I forget the name of the investment fund, but there's a fund, I think, somewhere in Europe where they only invest in stocks based strictly on employee engagement. And I think the fund has around 12% return or something. I forget the exact figures, but apart from obviously climate change, which you mentioned in the slides, what other measures do you use on that ESG scale?
So there's quite a few. So ethical framework is very comprehensive. So we look at a number of different areas within the portfolio. So I'm not sure if you guys can still see the slides, but a couple of the areas that we definitely have in change, looking at investments, are things like human rights. So we need to ensure that labour standards, meets the current guidelines, ensuring that the workplace is safe. We look for gender equality within organisations. So we're part of the 30 Club, to ensure that there is at least 30% female representation on boards of the ASX 100, and that happened recently. So that's a significant achievement from the group that's sort of pushing for that. We do quite a bit of corporate engagement as well with organisations if we don't believe that they have gender equality, on their particular board or within their organisation. There's different frameworks. So food framework, we look at a lot of different areas in terms of are they using the land appropriately? Are they managing their resources? So water, electricity, runoff, what's happening with waste? Are they engaging with local communities in that particular area? Are they managing temporary workforces such as people on 457 visas? So the ethical assessment is very comprehensive and covers off all elements of what we would believe to be important against our ethical charter. And then it's rated on a scoring system. So we score all our companies that we invest in between 0 and 3, 3 being perfect. Like people, that's very hard to come by, a perfect business. So we have to apply the approach. If it's a 2 or a 1, if it's a 1, there's some elements of that business that are questionable, but are the positive benefits outweighing the negatives? That's something that we tend to look at then engaging with that company probably a little bit more regularly in terms of our review process. If it's a 2 or a 3, the engagement on that particular company might need to be a little bit lower because they're meeting a lot more of our ethical criteria.
We had one question, and maybe Florencia is the one that picks up on it and tells us if she still sleeps or is sleepless because Kirk make her work so hard.
Yep. So investment banking is one of those industries that has a reputation for very grueling and long work hours. So how long does the average analyst at your firm work, and is it more than what's considered a normal work life? And if so, how do you justify that unhealthier work-life balance?
So, I guess I understand finance has that reputation, but coming from law before this job, I can tell you that it's a tough time and it's not something you want. I think you realize at the end of the day that it's just not worth it. When you're burning out, it's just doesn't work out. So coming to Australian Ethical for me was a breath of fresh air. They really live their values. It's something that you see every day in everyone. I mean, in all tiers, it doesn't matter if it's the most junior person to the CEO, everyone's out there. And I think it's really telling when the relationships you have with people at work are about their life. So they talk to you about their kids, their dogs, their lifestyle. They're not asking you, necessarily the first thing about work or introducing themselves like that. You really get to know people for who they are. And we do so many activities. I mean, when we were in the office, we had quarterly massages. There's always fresh bread coming in from the Bread and Butter Project. We have volunteer days. There's all kinds of things. And because there's so much purpose behind what we do, we really get to live that. And it makes it so much better. In terms of hours, everyone is about clocking off at 5 or 5:30, and that's it. In COVID, being, the company we are with, that much care, everyone's been able to be as flexible as they need to be for their kids or if they're caring for someone. So it really adds a difference when the company just has that much consideration for their people and loyalty that it's not your typical finance company, I think. And they've probably got a lot to teach the rest of the industry.
Good to hear.
That sounds great. Thank you. We have a couple of technical questions still.
Yeah, so obviously a lot of the big firms, the fund management firms like Goldman, are introducing robo-advisors to lower their costs and offer premium services. So is that something that Australian Ethical are trying to do, or is it still part of that quality of providing that service and providing that ethical component with their investments as well?
Yeah, so Australian Ethical, we don't actually have in-house advisors. Our model of business is probably a little bit different to your traditional fund managers or superannuation providers, where they would direct their customers to affiliated financial planning groups. that's where you might see those ads for a super fund receiving commissions or bonuses or benefits, or a fund manager getting kickbacks. Our approach to financial advice, we do think it's really fundamental and is a core part of our business, but we follow a different approach where we engage with like-minded financial planning organizations who want to recommend our product based on our values and their clients' values. So when a customer comes to us seeking financial advice, we don't have robo advice, but we do offer general financial advice to customers. And if they are needing that next level of personal financial advice, we send them to the Responsible Investment Association of Australasia, RIA, and they have a tool on their website called Find an Advisor, and that lists all the ethical advisors, and customers can search that via postcode or their city and find an advisor that's right for them based on their own personal values. The advice industry is, primarily there to ensure that, the customer is receiving the most appropriate advice for them and their needs. And we believe that's important for the customer to receive that advice, that's impartial of us pushing our agenda onto them.
Great. Thank you, Kirk. And there's a related question.
I was just wondering, I think it's kind of been mentioned that you guys mainly, acquire customers that are just, personal values in what you guys invest in. But do you know of any workplaces or companies that offer Australian ethical as like their standard option?
Yeah.
Or is it more so like people have to do their own research?
So we do have a dedicated employee relationship manager that specializes in managing sort of our strategic partnerships with larger businesses. So not that I can name them, but there are a number of businesses that use us as their default, and some of them are fairly well-known names. Products and companies that you may actually use regularly have us as their default superannuation provider. So that's sort of, companies that are thinking a little bit more progressively. I think there was that hesitation, in the broader community that ethical investing didn't drive returns. But Australian Ethicals proved that isn't the case. And our fee positioning is also very competitive. As I say, we sit in the middle of the market. But as an example, our default investment option, which is the balance fund, was the third strongest performing balance fund in all of the superannuation market last financial year. So we're a top 3 performer as well, and that's gaining a lot of interest in that employer space as well, that we are able to provide a superannuation option that isn't creating unnecessary harm and is also driving the responsible investment returns for their staff.
Great questions, thank you. And perhaps, given that we have most technical and content questions now addressed, perhaps Kirk and Florencia, we could focus a bit on getting a foot in the door, considering, working in investment management, and maybe others have also questions regarding tips, what makes sense, how to position oneself, what to make sure in the skill set and competency set is being delivered, for example, to be attractive to a firm like yours.
Yeah, my question was regarding the recruitment process of hiring someone for something like an ethical fund, because obviously ethics is a very large part of why you'd be selected to be a part of the company. And just going over like previous examples at companies like Enron and all these companies, it's often the individual malfeasance that kind of creates degeneration and spreads out to the bigger, to the whole company essentially. So my question was, how do you select someone that is, I guess, ethical? Because I feel like that'd be something that's very hard to evaluate, it's just given the fact that obviously there's certain people that are driven by self-interest and may deviate from, or may know how to maneuver questions that kind of purport themselves as ethical.
I think in terms of values alignment, when we're looking for candidates for any role in our organization, that's probably the number one consideration. Are you here for the right purpose, and do you want to contribute your whole self? So that includes your values and beliefs in terms of what we're trying to do. I don't think you'd be particularly popular if you didn't believe in climate change within our office, but you may be extremely capable. So in terms of assessment of people, values and ethics and how we live and breathe our values are essentially part of the screening criteria of a role within Australian Ethical. We're just as driven for profit as we are passionate about ethics. And ethics are, multifaceted and opinions do vary, which makes it also interesting and exciting as well when we have ethical debates about topical issues. But fundamentally, we want to make sure that, people are genuinely interested in all facets of ethics. And, a lot of people come to our business particular passions, and part of our sort of engagement model is that we want to hear about those regularly. So Thursday mornings, an opportunity for people to talk about their pet passion projects or what's happening in their local community or what they're doing to drive change, which is always, amazing and really inspiring. So those are the kind of things that Australian Ethical looks for in a staff member. Flo, did you have anything to add to that?
I guess, look, for me, in terms of your question specifically, I feel like, I think everyone wants to succeed and do well. I think there's always going to be that need for self-actualization. But I think there's an X spot. I think there's a spot in between where business meets doing good. I mean, you think of companies like Thank You Group and, where there is a purpose, or like us, where there is a purpose, but you're still driving profit, but you can do it in different ways. I mean, doing business today isn't what it was 50 years ago. There's so much potential to do good. So I think that there is a spot there where you can meet those two passions, which I think is where we lie. In terms of what I think is important, I think, work is work, but I think stay curious in everything that you do. I think that is fundamental. Anything you approach it with a curious, critical thinking mind, and that will open doors for you. Have a conversation. I think people, can close things off too quickly these days. It's all about engaging in debate, finding the other person's side, seeing what you can learn from someone else. And in our workplace, that's just such a beautiful thing when, you have so many different perspectives and you get to live that out with different people. So yeah, for me, it's those key things that just make it that much more enriching as a workplace. And I mean, when we've interviewed people with Kirk, I think it's those things we look for. We look for those extras. So what are you passionate about? Is there anything in your community? What are you doing about that? Could it be life-saving? Could it be, Amnesty International? Could it be handing out food on a Wednesday night? I mean, just find something, and that's always going to add to you. You might not know on the moment how and why, but definitely it adds to your character, to your person. There are stories. All of this is I guess like a quilt that's being sewed over time and over years. So yeah, it's not as straightforward as get this skill on LinkedIn and get approved for it, but it's but yeah, just follow where your heart leads you. I mean, there's always things to do and ways to contribute, so lots in there.
Not a straightforward answer.
So this sounds there are great opportunities for people that develop this passion for, the force for good, for doing something with their careers that is meaningful. My question to you guys is, Florencia, you have started a few years back. What is a kind of maybe a journey at Australian Ethical? I was lucky enough to have met students that joined you and have followed their paths within the firm, and then also maybe other firms. What kind of journey could be expected from someone? Is it the mathematical quantitative trip to start with, or is it more getting to know the business? Perhaps you could shed some light on that for those who are interested, and also get an expectation of what could be coming if someone chooses to go with a firm like yours.
Okay, do you want to go first, or do you want me to?
Well, you go first. Talk about your journey.
Well, my journey, as I said, was in law. I mean, it was not in finance, and I didn't have a finance background. But again, I loved what Australian Ethical did, and I knew that whatever it was that I needed to learn, I would. So I got all my certifications and did all the things as soon as I met Kirk and came on board. So initially I came on as a client services representative, and so I've been doing that. So I work in the managed fund space, so with private equity clients who want to come in and invest their money. For me, I guess the exposure I've had has been incredible because the company is quite lean, and so you get to do so many different things. It's so versatile. I've been working on project management now for the past maybe 6 months. So we've started a new online application form process that has been in the works for months with different providers, with our ops team, and that's all just come to light now. It's all been born 48 hours ago. It's fresh. Now with Kirk, we're working on a CRM project. So there's all kinds of things that you have the ability to expose yourself to. Then I have a personal passion for the foundation. So I did a minor secondment when we were doing our foundation work now in May. So for the month of May, I participated in that. There's just so much room to kind of anything that you feel that you're passionate about or can contribute to or you can add value to. This company, it really gives that space. So that's a really beautiful thing. And Kirk, you can even talk about Malcolm and his journey.
Yeah, so Malcolm was a student in this particular class, big fan of Gerhard, and he was a recipient of the Australian Ethical Award 1 year, and he came on board in our team and has moved on now into a product specialist position, and he's undertaking an MBA at this point and has done CFA as well. And these are things that the business is supportive and is funding Malcolm to learn and continue to grow. So we're always about continual education and development. As Flo said, we're a fairly lean organisation. We're just over 60 staff, and we have all the traditional roles of your financial services providers, but relatively small teams, which is nice. Coming from prior to my time at Australian Ethical, a large financial institution with over 1,000 staff members. You feel disconnected from different business units, and your opportunity to get hands-on experience on a number of different areas just isn't made possible. Whereas in a business like ours, we're so heavily involved in so many decision-making points because we are representing our customers. We do get that exposure. And other people in my team have moved on to investments. I got an investment analyst in amongst the team there looking at our balanced portfolio. So there are definitely different opportunities amongst our team to work with our stakeholders in advice, employers, our superannuation fund members. So yeah, as a growing organisation as well, we do have a significant growth trajectory and also lots of opportunities for new roles coming up over the next 12 months. There's a couple of positions currently made vacant, so check out LinkedIn. So several more positions to come in terms of client-facing roles. Which is exciting because as we're growing quite quickly, we're acquiring more customers, which means we need to spend more time engaging with them.
Beautiful. If there's any feedback in the chat, the students in the next 10 minutes while they break are welcome to leave a comment for you that I'm happy to copy paste over and send it to you by email. And otherwise, I would like to strictly thank both of you for making time for us. This is clearly the after 5 p.m. Time that we're enjoying here with you. And therefore, on behalf of the students and the business school, we're very thankful for your view into the commercial reality of funds management. And therefore, allow me to do the virtual hand clap. In a classroom, typically we make this very loud and very proud. But I thank you for your contribution tonight. And I hope we'll see you soon.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Gerhard.
Thank you so much for having us.
Have
a good night, guys.